Dear colleagues, it is my pleasure to present the joint findings and the joint research projects of the team from Borys Grinchenko Kyiv University and Zaporizhzhia National University, Emoji Explication in Digital Communication, Logical-Phenomenological Experiment. Okay. In this study, we consider reality or being as the phenomenology of language, specifically the phenomenology of a particular linguistic fact in its specific speech application. To explain a certain phenomenon subordinated to the broad meaning of being, language is needed as a systematizer and a construct. And in turn, the language, in terms of systematization and construction, becomes the existential dimension through which both cognition and formation of new knowledge and new facts is possible. This way, the language becomes a phenomenon that reproduces the specifics of ontology. Specifically, that is true for the ontology of the digital reality or digital realm. It becomes language in the digital realm, becomes the synthesis of logic as a structural level and the phenomenology as an ontological level, which is divided into natural factors, the identity, the mentality of the speaker, and acquired factors, the education, the personal experiences, and so on. So the dichotomy of our empirical constructed experiment that we've conducted on the emoji sign in digital communication is dependent and is verified by the bilaterality of the sign in digital communication. And this study specifically is therefore subject to the trajectory of knowledge movement from the phenomenological to the formal logical-linguistic level of perception, which can be picked up in turn both by human cognition and by machine cognition, which is significantly important to the scope of our workshop and to the scope of our research team studies. In this study, we consider the digital emoji sign as a parcel of a specific language through the prism of logical linguistic approach. And that is from the structure of its meaning and vice versa. The explication of the content plane and the expression plane of the emoji sign, due to the bilateral nature of its structure, is inexhaustible. And because the optics of the emoji involves psychophysiological factors that appeal to both linguistic and extralinguistic elements of sign formation and perception. Consequently, the researchers nominate the polylaterality of the emoji as a substrate for the study of the emoji in digital communication specifically, which has led to our specific, and through this inquiry, which has led to our interest in the logical and phenomenological levels of interpretation of the digital sign at the same time, simultaneously. The study empirically is based on an experiment, that is the empirical associative experiment that was initiated by our authorial group. And it was conducted through a survey, a Google Form survey, and we called it the Emoji-association. It contains, the experiment accumulated 147 perceptions and interpretations of emoji signs from different groups of recipients. The age scope of recipients ranged from years old, 10 years old to 70 years old. And these large-scale coverage allowed to fundamentally reflect the picture of the world and digital literacy of mentally different representatives, the representatives of different generations from digital immigrants to digital natives. And it also, these range of recipients, these samples, allowed us to identify groups of people whose linguistic pattern differs significantly from respondents of other ages. I shall point out that the native tongues of the respondents, they varied. Those were mostly European-based languages, but the perception of, so the perspective of this particular empirical study would be to identify the cognitive patterns in discerning emoji science in digital communication for the speakers of different groups of languages. The next up would be the Asian languages. The empirical data was tested through the concept of the semantic triangle by Frege, which schematically demonstrates the bilateral approach to the plane of the word content, dependent on both the abstract denotation, the word proper, and the specific meaning, the word sense. Defining the meaning that a person connects with the world at a certain period of life, we, according to the semantic concept of Frege, we identified that we were dealing with objective material data, the physics, the structure of reality, the energy in perception, various science. And we also identified that that is applicable to the perception of non-existent objects like non-existent emotions, which get the material denotation through a sign. The search for truth, the search for verification, that is the core of the experiment in the nature of reality and the truth of the sign in this reality is a spin on what Wittgenstein is calling the language game. And in the study, we transgress the concept of the language game into a syllogistic verification of the denotation of the emoji sign in synthesis with the perception and interpretation and suggested interpretations outlined by those 147 respondents. The syllogistics as an approach, the logical approach to the verification of whether there is truth in perception of a specific sign, whether there is truth in perception and in interpretation of various nominations of what the sign represents and as the kind of verbal stimuli for the perception of the sign in discourse. Why it is important, because it became the framing of the thought, which is, it became the necessary condition. Oh, I'm sorry, I have to go back on this idea. Okay, so it became the framing of the thought, and it became the interpretation of the structures and the processes of the discovering of the verified meaning of the sign. The syllogism itself that was built in order to verify the perception of the meaning of the emoji sign in digital communication comprised of 3 components: SPM, that's the classic structure, the smaller term, the longer term, and the middle term. Having construed the 3 terms of a syllogism, we were able to build interpretations and perceptions of expression of a digital sign. Okay, I'm gonna move on. For the specific consideration, the verification experiment was focused exclusively on one type of emoji sign in digital communication, and that is the smiling face with open mouth and cold sweat. That is the description of this emoji. It has an assigned Unicode to it. That's what it's called. And that's how it's perceived. Let's see how it's perceived. All associated tokens that were collected from our recipients were analyzed for association frequency using the family of Voyant tools and worded out tools. Those are the corpus processing tools. The 3 most frequently used tokens, which formed the basis of a simple categorical syllogism that we later built, were grouped by genus and species categories. The comical is a category of the genus, contains a generalized description of the concept comic or fun, which in turn branches into the smaller, more specific concepts and belongs to the category of species, the conceptual features like laughter, sarcasm, irony, and so on. The majority of tokens, with the advantage of the generic concept of the comic, provided for the construction of the general affirmative syllogism, the so-called the Barbara mode syllogism, AAA. with the corresponding system of formulas, with the right corresponding system of formulas, with subsequent verification using the truth table, which in turn reproduces a step-by-step verification algorithm, whether the suggested proposition is true or false in perception. The study introduces the appropriate formula followed by its verification using the truth tables, and they have passed the stages of verification through conjunction and implication. The table reveals the conjunction, which can be verbalized by the construction of the contracted causal sentence if-then mode. The next stage of the table is to confirm or refute the first part of the first proposition, and the results, if the results of the build-up proposition contain an error, the verification stops there, but the proposition was built accurately, so there was no need to stop the verification. And finally, we have visualized the experiment with the help of with the results of the verification experiment, with the help of the Frigge's semiotic triangle, and that qualifies the sign and the interpretant. And we've entered the terms that we obtained and verified through the syllogism into the triangle. You can see laughter, joy, and faith. Those build the semiotic triangle for the perception and further dissemination of meaning through the interaction of that particular type of emoji sign. Thus, based on the concept of Frege, we conclude the following. Signs that do not denote any objects also have meaning in digital communication. That is a given, but that is very important to understand if we want to teach sign recognition to neural networks and if we want to teach them to corpus tools. Many meanings can be connected with one subject, that is the staple of the semiotic and the sign asymmetry theory. But once again, through the verification formula introduced, it is possible to derive a reliable algorithm that will help both the human mind and the machine mind to pick up on the accurate referent and the accurate denotation for the specific sign. Knowing the meaning of a sign and its expression, it is not, we are not always able to identify the object that the sign signifies. And the establishment of this correspondence between the sign and the expression is precisely the essence of academic discoveries in computational linguistics. Meaning is objective and intersubjective, accessible to all communicators. There is nothing more accessible than the iconographic language of emoji, but in order to make it less opaque, experiments of verification need to be conducted in order to derive, like I've said, reliable patterns of recognition and reliable patterns of further dissemination of interpretation of these signs in the flow of digital communication so that algorithms can pick up on them and so that the communication is transparent, efficient, and meaningful. And that pretty much sums up the idea that we have input into this particular study. Thank you for your attention.